بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. This is lesson number 90 from the explanation of Bulugh Al-Maram from Kitab Al-Salat. Inshallah, today we'll be focusing on, first off, we're going to start off with talking about the shurut, shurut al-salat, all right? Because as we know that the salat itself, it has shurut, it has arkan, and it has wajibat, it has sunan. All right, so we have to be familiar with all of these things, and inshallah, the shurut. I mean, when we look at the conditions for the salat, these are the things that are binding on the person before he goes into the prayer. Before he goes into the prayer. All right, and when we look at the arkan, and we look at these the pillars of the actual prayer itself as the person's in the prayer. And then the same thing with the wajibat. And inshallah, we're going to go over like the difference. We'll try to get as much done as we can today. But first, I mean, the main important thing is that we deal first with the shurut, all right, which are the conditions. Like, you know, for example, like the person has to have meet these conditions before he even prays. So the first condition, obviously, is the condition of al-Islam. Because if a person if he's not entered into Islam, because obviously this is a rukn athani, as we spoke about in the last lesson. All right, so this is the second pillar of Islam. So if the person has not accepted Islam, as you know, so the shahadatan, he's not accepted the shahadatain. So khalas, he's not a Muslim. So salat it's not binding upon him. But even if he does pray, it's not going to be accepted from him without entering into Islam. So we see this from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said in the Quran, he said, وَقَدَمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. So here, all of the actions that they've done, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will turn all the deeds that they've done, every action that they've done, speaking about the kuffar, min amalin, from all the actions that they done, from all the actions, from فَجَعَلْنَاهُ, and we made it what? هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. They differ about the meaning of هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. Like if you had a hole in the wall and the sun was shining, and then the rays of the sun, they come through this little hole. Some say that it's the light of the sun, and just like you see that light, if you try to grab it, you can't grab it. There's nothing there. Just like their actions. It's like they think that they've done all these actions, but when they come on the day of judgment, there's no actions. And other people say that it's the dust particles that you can see through that ray of light. So when that ray of light is shining through that little hole, you see the dust particles flying, and you try to grab at the dust particles, but then when you look, you have nothing. You can't see anything in here because you can only see the dust particles in that little ray of light. But when you try to grab at it, there's nothing there. So this is their actions, because they never entered into Islam. So since they've never entered into Islam, so nothing that they do. If they were to pray, they would go on a Hajj, and they do all of this, and they died on kufr. Khalas, none of these actions are going to be accepted from them. So Islam is the condition of those actions being accepted in the first place. And we see that the same meaning where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said similar to this in a different ayah. He said, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَعْمَالُهُمْ كَسَرَابٍ. He said the example of the people who disbelieve, their actions are like a mirage. كسراب بقيعة يحسبه ظمآن ماء. He said it's like a mirage in the middle of a desert that the person, he thinks that a person was very thirsty. He's just like dying of thirst, and he sees it and he thinks that the mirage is water, and so he gets excited, right? حتى إذا جاءه, but until he still sees it as being water until he gets to it. لم يجده شيئا. And then he realizes there's nothing. There's nothing there. Just like their actions. They're doing all these actions in the dunya, and they think that, they're doing something correct and they're doing something right. They're giving in charity. They're doing all this. But when they come on the day of judgment, they'll realize that none of that is going to be accepted from them, because they never entered into the deen in the first place. So that's the first condition. The second condition, obviously, is that the person has to have an aql. He has to have he has to be sane. All right, this doesn't mean like he has to have an aql, like he has to think logically, because if that were the case, the vast majority of people their salat wouldn't be accepted. Allah Mustaan. They don't even meet the conditions of going into salat. But what it's talking about is sanity. All right, sanity. Like you can't be crazy, like crazy to the point where you don't know what you're doing. Like you have to know what you're doing. So when you're going into salat, you know exactly what you're going into, and that's how you get the reward. Because maybe a crazy person might get up and pray, but he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't, because he has no control over his mind. So Allah Musta'an. And as we know, anyways, the crazy person, marfu'an anhu al-qalam. The pen has been raised from him. Like whatever he does amongst the actions is not written because he is not in his right mind. He's not in a state of sanity. The only time that you get held accountable for the things that you get held accountable for you doing them because you know that you're doing them. So you're like, consciously disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, consciously doing these things. But a person now who now doesn't have a sanity, he's not consciously disobeying Allah. So those sins are not written for him, and we see this in the hadith, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Rufi al-qalam an thalatha." The three people that the pen is raised from them. عن المجنون المغلوب على عقله. The crazy person who's like completely like lost all control of his mind. حتى يفيق, until he regains his sanity. وعن النائم, and the person who's sleeping حتى يستيقظ, until he wakes up. وعن الصبي حتى يحتلم, and the young child until he or she reaches the age of adolescence or puberty. So until that time, these people are not going to be held accountable for their actions because, especially with the crazy person, because the person doesn't have the faculties of his mind. The person who's sleeping doesn't know. Like, for example, a person who, he might, maybe in his sleep make a statement of kufr. You can't hold that against the person if he said that in his sleep because it's not in a state of mind. You don't know what caused him to say that, so that none of that is going to be held against him because he said that in the time of him not being conscious of what he's saying. So Allah Musta'an, because you can go to a person who sleeps, people that talk in their sleep and make them repeat things and make them say things that they would never say unless they were sleeping. So Allah Musta'an. The third thing is a tamyiz. All right. And the word tamyiz in the Arabic language, it comes from like mayyiza, yumayyizu, which means to distinguish, to be able to distinguish. So once the child has reached that type of age of being able to distinguish, even if he hasn't reached the age of puberty, but he is, he can distinguish between right and wrong, and he can understand the actions of the salat, and he's reached that type of age. Then is allowed to pray, because if you take like smaller children, 4 or 5, 3 years old, they haven't reached this age. They get in the salat and they play, and they don't have it because they're not going to take it seriously, right? And they don't understand what they're doing. They don't know that they're praying, so they haven't reached this age of a tamyiz. But then once the child gets to the age where he knows, like you see, like the kids when they're like 7 or 8, they know that they're praying. They know that this is salat. They know that we don't play, we don't talk, we don't mess around, and this is a matter we're here to pray. So this is the age of tamyiz, all right, and this is an obligation, obviously, for the prayer to be accepted, because the person needs to be known. It has to be able to distinguish. He knows what he's doing. He knows the action. So like a small kid, 4 or 5 years old, doesn't know. That he's praying. He does like little just actions and movements. So for the reward, the person has to have reached that age of a tamyiz. All right, of a tamyiz. And we can see this meaning in the hadith in Sahih Bukhari on the authority of Amr ibn Salama. All right, and this goes back to a statement where Abu Qilaba was speaking to him. قال ألا تلقاه فتسأله قال فلقيته, and then so on and so on to the last part of the hadith where he said where the Prophet ordered his people to pray, to find an imam and to find a person that, calls the adhan for them and doesn't take money for his adhan. And they looked at the people and they, to see who, and when he told them that the person that leads them in salat should be the most knowledgeable of the Quran, and they looked and they found that he was the one that was the most knowledgeable, and at that time he was only 8 years old and he was the imam and he used to lead the salat. But because he had that, as a tamyiz, all right, even though he hadn't reached the age of bulugh, of puberty, but because he had reached the age of tamyiz and he knew what he was doing, so they made him the imam and he led the salat even at that young age. So this is the third condition. The fourth condition, obviously, a tahara. That not just a tahara, as far as wudu, but also, with the clothing, that you have to completely make sure that remove any form of najasa from your clothing, as we've gone through in the first chapter. The whole purpose of the first chapter was to prepare the person for the salat, because obviously going into the salat, these are the requirements. I mean, once the person's he's entered into Islam, he has his sanity, and he's reached the age of a tamyiz, of being able to distinguish. And now, obviously, he needs to, he needs to purify himself. So the fourth one is a tahara we're dealing with now, with wudu. Because as we see in the hadith of Abi Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ. So here the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not accept the salat of anyone from amongst you. إذا أحدث, if he did number one, number two, حتى يتوضأ, and all right, until he makes wudu. So if he has made his wudu invalid for any reason, for any of the reasons that we mentioned in the previous chapter, and khalas, the salat is not accepted from that person until he makes wudu. The fifth condition is izalatu najasa. Izalatu an-najasa is to make sure that there is no najasa in the place that you're praying, nor in your clothing. And this goes back to a statement from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Mudaththir, where he said, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, and your clothing فَطَهِّرْ, clean it from all forms of najasa. All right, and make sure that you go into the salat and the area that you're praying in, there's no najasa, and your clothing, the clothing that you're praying, and also your body itself, that there is no najasa on your body. The sixth condition is satrul awra, which means to cover up the awra of the person. If the awra of the person cannot be exposed in the salat without any valid reason. If it's invalid, then the salat, you haven't fulfilled the condition, so the salat is not going to be valid. So he said, and this goes back to a statement where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Ya bani Adam, خذوا زينتكم عند كل مسجد وكلوا واشربوا ولا تسرفوا إنه لا يحب المسرفين. خذوا زينتكم عند كل مسجد. And in the statement and the tafsir of this ayah, it goes back to a statement of Al-Kalbi. He said, Azina ma yuwari al-awra. All right, the zina here mentioned in the ayah is anything that covers up the awra. عند كل مسجد لطواف أو صلاة. So for every single masjid, for the tawaf or for the salat. We also see the statement of Ibn Abbas radhiyallahu anhuma, as you see in Tafsir ibn Kathir, where he said, عن ابن عباس في قوله تعالى خذوا زينتكم عند كل مسجد, الآية قال كان رجال يطوفون بالبيت عراه. So in the time of Jahiliyyah, the people that used to make tawaf around the Kaaba naked, with no clothing. فأمرهم الله بالزينة. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded them بالزينة. وزينة اللباس, to put on clothing when they're making tawaf. وهو ما يواري السوء, which is the awra. Sorry, so he said anything that covers up the awra. This is the libas. So this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we have to cover up the awra whenever we're doing any of the, I mean, obviously, even outside of these worships, these acts of worship, the awra has to be covered. So it's not just because for these acts of worship. Doesn't mean like, once you get done praying that you can walk around naked. No, I mean, your awra has to be covered at all times. But this is a condition. This is a condition for them being accepted. So, I mean, if that condition is not met, then the worship is not accepted. All right, the seventh condition is dukhul al-waqt. All right, that the time has to enter, that the time has had to enter. All right, if the time is not entered and you pray early, then the salat is not accepted. If the time has left and you don't have an excuse, you postpone the salat until the time went out and the time is left, then the salat is not accepted without an excuse. Now, if you're sleeping and you overslept the salat, you get up and you pray when you remember it. Or if you forgot, because sometimes you get busy, you're working, you're doing something that's just, it's completely overtaking your mind where you just forgot. And then when you looked at your watch, you're like, oh my God, you didn't even realize the time and you realize that the time went out. No, you pray as soon as you remember it. But if you're just sitting there watching the clock and say, oh, I'll pray in 10 minutes. Oh, I'll pray in 15 minutes. And then the time goes out, then the salat is not accepted. As well as if you pray before the time. If you pray before the time is not accepted, unless obviously you're praying as a traveler. All right, if you're praying as a traveler, that's different. But we're talking about the muqim. We're talking about the person praying in the place where he resides in. That he's not combining the salawat, that he's praying in normal prayers, that it's not permissible to pray. Obviously the time is the time has to enter before the salat is prayed. And we see this in the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said in the Quran, He said, إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. Alright, so in the salat, verily the salat كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, is binding upon the mu'mineen, كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. It's binding upon them at a specific time. And just like Ibn Mas'ud said, إِنَّ لِلصَّلَاةِ وَقْتًا كَوَقْتِ الْحَجِّ. He said that for verily the salat has a time just like the time of Hajj. You can't go and make time a Hajj and go and say I'm going to go in Al-Maram and make Hajj, or I'm going to go in Sha'ban and make Hajj. No, you make Hajj at the time of Hajj. You pray Dhuhr at the time of Dhuhr. So he said that even the time of the salat has a time just like the time of Hajj. And we also see in the statement of Ibn Abbas where he said, a mafruḍa is mafruḍa in this, but is mafruḍa at this time. It's also a statement of Mujahid and others. So, the time is a specific time. And of course, the time that was, that we prayed a prayer was taught to the Prophet ﷺ by Jibril. When he came to the Prophet ﷺ, he prayed at the earliest time, then he prayed at the latest time. And he said anywhere between these two times is the salat. This is the time for the salat. So it's, it's only accepted as long as it's within those times, and it's accepted outside of the time if it's late with a valid excuse. With a valid excuse. Thamin, which is now the 8th condition, is istiqbalul qibla, is to face the qibla. Obviously, if you purposely do not pray to the qibla, or you know where the qibla is and you purposely don't pray to it, then your salat obviously is not valid because you have not fulfilled this condition. So this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see in Surah Al-Baqarah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا. Because at that time they were praying to Bayt al-Maqdis. And the Prophet ﷺ had, he was hoping, he wanted the qibla to be to the Kaaba, to Masjid al-Haram. So this is فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا, the one that you desired, that you wanted, that you were pleased with. فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. So face the direction of the Masjid al-Haram. وَحَيْثُ مَا كُنْتُمْ فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرًا. And wherever you are, then you face that direction. That's the qibla, and this is a command. So being that it's a command, it means that this now is a condition of the salat. And if a person were to pray, like I said, on purpose to other than the qibla, then no. I mean, as we're going to go through, inshallah, throughout Bulugh Al-Maram, we're going to see as far as, like, for example, if the person's traveling and he doesn't know which direction is the qibla, and he does like ijtihad, and he tries to find out, this is the qibla. He thinks that it's in this direction, but then he finds out later that it wasn't in that direction. And this person, as long as he used everything within his means to know where the qibla was, but he just made a mistake, and this person, his salat is still accepted, inshallah. But we're talking about the person. But if a person just lazily says, "Oh, well, we don't know where the qibla is, let's just pray anyway," no, that's not accepted. That's not accepted. You have to use whatever means is at your disposal to know where the qibla is, whatever it is. Asking people, looking at a map, using Google Maps, looking at the stars, whatever, because you can see different stars and you know the direction of like what direction the star is, so as far as like you can see like which is east and which is west based on if you're familiar with certain stars, and that's it. Whatever it is that you have to use at your disposal to know where the qibla is, then use it. But you just can't just we'll just pray any direction. No, it doesn't work. That's a condition of the salah, is that the person has to pray facing the qibla. All right, a tasa, and the ninth condition, and this is the final condition, is the niyyah, because now everything has been set up. Now you're about to start the salat. So going into the salat, you have to have the correct intentions, and that you're doing this action solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That you're not doing this action for any other purpose. You're not doing it just because you have to. You're not doing it because your father told you to. You're not doing this because you want the people to see you praying. You're not doing this for money, for dunya, for any other purpose. You're only doing this only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the action is solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ حُنَفَاءَ وَيُقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمَ. We have not been commanded with anything except to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mukhlisin, with sincerity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone in all forms of worship. Lahu dina hunafa. And this is the path of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Wa yuqimu salat, and he established the prayer, and wa yutu zakat, and give the zakat, wa dhalika dinul qayyima. And this is the upright religion. This is the correct religion. Is that everything is done with ikhlas. And of course we know the hadith of Umar ibn al-Khattab, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ إِمْرٍ مَا نَوَى. To the rest of the hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. That all of our actions are based on our intentions, and every person is going to get exactly what he's intended. So that having the correct intention and praying with sincerity is the first condition of an act being accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the second condition of the act being accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that it has to be done in accordance with the Quran and the Sunnah. From the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, in which he said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu fahuwa rad." That whoever innovates something into this affair of ours, then it is rejected. It's rejected. It's not going to be accepted. So all actions have to be done with sincerity, with the correct intention that you're doing this action solely to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to carry out the obligations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made binding upon you. To fulfill these obligations, to carry out the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is your intention, and you have no other intentions, no other side intentions or sub intentions or anything like that. All of your intentions are sincerely for Allah, and it's done in accordance with the Quran and the Sunnah, and that's the only way that we can get our actions accepted. So inshallah, with that we'll end here. So these are the conditions. These are the conditions going into the salat. Inshallah, in the next lesson, inshallah, we'll be dealing with the arkan of salat. So we're focusing on the things that the salat is, the pillars of the salat, that these things cannot be absent from the salat whatsoever, or else the salat also will not be accepted. Allahumma musta'an wa ilahuna subhanaka wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.